I know a lot of gamers out there don't have much patience. At least that's what Bishop, the dude at the video store, said.
Sorry guys, we don't have time for an intro because I've got a really important review today. Specifically on Travis Strikes Again No More Heroes for the Switch. I guess you could say I've got a PSA for TSA. Anyway, some background info. Goichi Suda, better known as Suda51, is a somewhat obscure and very offbeat Japanese game developer who first gained media attention, along with his team Grasshopper Manufacturer, with the release of Killer 7 in 2005. While the game only had moderate sales and garnered many mixed reactions, the bizarre and innovative game turned plenty of heads and developed somewhat of a cult following in the West, when before, Suda's games had only been available in Japan. I'd love to go into how incredible this twisted masterpiece of a game is, but I'll save that for another day. Inspired by Nintendo's then current console, the Wii, Suda51 would develop his next game with specific focus on the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. This would eventually lead to his next big title, No More Heroes. While the gameplay itself wasn't as creative or unique as Killer 7, it utilized the Wiimote and Nunchuck to an impressively effective degree. Something that many second and third party companies had troubles with in the Wii's lifetime. The game itself focused on the rise of dorky otaku Travis Touchdown as he climbs the ranks of the dubious Assassins Association, with his primary goal to impress and get lucky with the association's advocate Sylvia Crystal. Players loved the game's intriguing characters, clever writing, and irreverent self-awareness.
It alone would jack up the age rating of this game even further. But what if the game gets delayed? You don't want this to become No More Heroes forever, do you?
No More Heroes wasn't a blockbuster, doing especially poorly in Japan, but the game's unique presentation, standout story, and novelty of being an M-rated Wii exclusive garnered more sales from the West than Suda had ever seen in his home country. This would prompt Suda to do his first ever sequel game with No More Heroes 2. While the gameplay was improved a bit, and a lot of the weaker aspects in the first game were streamlined or removed altogether, most fans would agree that the follow-up didn't quite hit the same sweet spot that the first did, and it failed to gain the same attention as well.
And you don't even remember! You know how humiliating that is?
Sorry.
The series would lie dormant for nearly a decade, while Suda and Grasshopper focused on other games. That was until the Nintendo Switch came around and caught Suda's attention yet again, and in 2019 it saw the release of his latest work, Travis Strikes Again, No More Heroes. So, let's pop this bad boy in and check it out. During the game's opening, you'll notice it says Grasshopper Manufacturer 20th Anniversary Commemorative Title. This isn't just for show. Right off the bat, Suda51 fans are given a very special treat. Seriously, my mind was blown when I first saw this intro. The visuals are very distinct, that highly cel-shaded look with very specific color tones and shading, and even the backgrounds become progressively recognizable as it goes on. And buddy, this isn't just a reference or Easter egg either. As soon as you recognize that voice on the other end of the phone, everything becomes clear.
Your brain is clogged with muscle. It'll just give you a headache.
No way. Could it be? That's right. Dan Smith from Killer 7. He even brings up Mills and Curtis Blackburn, two other major characters from the game. So not only are we getting a continuation of No More Heroes after almost a decade, but we're also seeing more from Suda's Killer 7 for the first time in nearly 15 years. On top of that, this confirms that Killer 7 and No More Heroes takes place in the same universe, which as a fan is just insane. Alright, okay, I got so excited about all this that I forgot to actually explain what's going on here. Sorry, if you haven't guessed, I'm a big Killer 7 fan. A big Killer 7 fan. So the opening scene features a new character named Badman, sitting in a hotel room and talking over the phone to Dan Smith. Initially, Dan is tracking Badman down and preparing to kill him, but after Badman explains that he's trying to avenge the death of his daughter, Dan has a change of heart and decides to help him out. As it turns out, Badman is the aptly named father to Badgirl, the number 2 ranked assassin that Travis Touchdown is just barely able to defeat and kill in the first No More Heroes. Dan reveals to Badman where Travis is hiding and hands him a death ball, suggesting that it's a key to bringing his daughter back. If none of this is making sense so far, don't worry, that's normal, and I'll explain later. After this, we get a second scene leading into the start of the game, which actually comes from the game's trailer. Using the information he gained from Dan, Badman finds Travis and his hidden RV in the middle of the American Southwest, where he's been hiding away from all the glory and bloody infamy he attained in the previous games. As it so happens, Travis has the Death Drive Mark II console with him, and it reacts to the Death Ball in Badman's possession, pulling both of them into the Phantom game console itself. And this is where the game begins. Well, once the Death Drive boots up, of course, with a very familiar startup jingle. And now we can finally start playing Electric Thunder Tiger 2? Ah, damn it, now I have to change the name of the video. So, as you may have guessed, the Death Ball that was given to Badman earlier was actually a game for the Death Drive. I really like how it gets its own menu and theme. And if you wait long enough, you even get a cutscene. It's actually pretty neat, with cool rotoscoped animation which shows the general backstory of the game's protagonist, Electro Triple Star. After this, Travis appears inside the game's world, Terminator style, and you're finally given control. From here on out, the majority of the story and dialogue in the game is done with text, along with jumbled voices that sound somewhat similar to Banjo-Kazooie, or perhaps Suda's own Killer 7. While this may be a disappointment to some, thankfully Suda's distinct writing shines through here more than ever, like Travis complaining that the game is taking too long to start. The game's HUD is interesting. Instead of being an overlay, it's displayed on each side of the screen, forcing the game into a 4:3 aspect ratio, which I personally like a lot as it harkens back to the old TV game experience. On the left you have the player's stats, which I'll get more into later. And what's all that nonsense going on over on the right? Well, that's where player 2's stats are in co-op mode. Wait a minute, a Suda51 game with a co-op mode? I never thought it'd see the day. The gameplay has been altered quite a bit from the Wii titles. Suda51 decided to go a more retro route, and designed Travis Strikes Again with the use of a single Joy-Con in mind. Now you are able to use whatever controller scheme you happen to be comfortable with, but I personally enjoyed playing it the way he intended. The left button is used for the light attack, which can be held down to quickly swat away the weaker enemies, but it does drain your beam pretty quickly. The top button is a heavy attack, which is slower and more risky, but deals damage much more effectively to stronger enemies if used correctly. The right button allows you to dodge roll from enemies or hazards, and the bottom button lets you jump. While this may not seem like a big deal, jumping actually adds a whole different level of strategy in combating the game's enemies, with the light attack allowing you to do a dashing airstrike, and the heavy attack useful for taking out surrounding enemies. The R button is your special move, which requires a full meter to use. It's extremely powerful and can be used to clear the screen or heavily damage bigger enemies. With each use, the attack levels up for more damage. Unless you take too many hits, then you lose it. Finally, we have the L button, which utilizes a new mechanic called skill chips in conjunction with the 4 buttons on the face of the controller. As you play through the game, you collect these highly useful chips, either from defeating bosses or finding them hidden in areas of each level. I think it's a really cool detail how the skill chips are clearly modeled after the Switch's own game cartridges. These chips easily contribute the most depth and strategy to TSA's gameplay. As you continue finding them, you'll find yourself experimenting with more chip combinations until you eventually find a combo that suits your individual playstyle. Co-op mode expands upon this even further, creating more opportunities to synergize your skill chips for highly effective and lethal combos. Oh, and they didn't forget to include Travis's signature charge up, which can be done by clicking in the left stick and then either shaking the controller or wiggling the right stick. I prefer shaking the controller. The main baddies you deal with aren't normal video game enemies, but bugs that seem to be infecting the game's code. They come in all sorts of varieties and tend to have silly names like Bug Street Boys and Bug Gates. As you progress, you'll run into a number of interesting NPCs who often have bizarre things to tell you. Bug Extra's wise words of wisdom are always worth reading. Most importantly are probably the messages from Dr. Juvenile, the creator of the Death Drive console, who explains how to play. And most mysteriously is the White Sheep Man, whose cryptic suggestions follow you from level to level. Playing through the opening level of my first time, I have to admit that I was initially worried that the game might be a bit overly simplistic and monotonous. The majority of the game is played with you taking out a horde of bug enemies in a quarantined area before moving on to the next. As you move on, however, the game starts to add more variety, both in the levels as well as the fighting. Skill chips keep the gameplay interesting as you find yourself gaining more abilities regularly, some of which are directly stolen from the bosses a la Mega Man, and fresh enemies give you a reason to utilize your new powers. The levels also switch things up with additional gameplay mechanics here and there, which is always a nice change of pace. Let's be honest though, while the controls worked well, the original No More Heroes games were never strongest in the gameplay, or even the eccentric side things. The best part of No More Heroes was always the bosses. From a crooked old gunslinger singing a jazzy lounge song in an empty stadium, to a bat swinging pink tutu wearing psychopath,
it's all the same. They're all going to pay. Yeah, with their fucking lives.
It really excited you to keep going and see who the next assassin was going to be, and what their encounter with Travis was going to be like.
Right? Why do we have to kill each other anyway?
So how does TSA's bosses compare? I have to admit right away that the bosses do start off with a disadvantage here, in that all of their interaction with Travis is done via text, whereas the previous games utilize full voiceovers and cutscenes. That being said, the bosses themselves are still really awesome overall. They all have really cool and distinct designs, their own personalities and backstories, and each their own method of fighting that is sure to keep you on your toes and develop new strategies for each of them. They definitely reach the bar that Suda set with No More Heroes. In fact, we even get to see a perspective on the bosses that we never really had before. For instance, the first level's boss is Electro Triple Star, the protagonist of the game that Travis and Badman are initially sucked into. Travis isn't just fighting another assassin here like in the previous games, he's fighting a hero. A video game hero that he actually looked up to in his youth. After you beat Triple Star and finish him off with a signature wrestling move, we get to see Travis have some introspective thoughts on the person he just faced off against, which is something that we've never really gotten before. It could be because the game wanted to make the most out of the text-driven story, or it could be because this is simply a more mature Travis, since 10 years have passed since the events of the first game. Regardless, it's a really interesting perspective on the character, when before we've mostly only seen him as being a cold-blooded killer. And the morality of him going up against characters that aren't just straight-up assassins or murderers is also something worth thinking about. Perhaps this mirrors Suda's own growth as a writer since the first game. As for the boss fights themselves, they feel fun and engaging, which is largely in part to the new gameplay style. I want to go more into the game's story. At first it seems like a pretty standard and even cliche scenario, with two characters being sucked into a video game that they have to fight out of. This is only the case for the first level, however, and this obvious premise gets subverted soon after. Travis and Badman aren't stuck inside of the console, but are instead purposely diving into it with each new game they get. And it's not revealed right away what Travis and Badman's motives are to complete these games together. We find out later that completing all 6 of the Death Drive's infamous games is supposed to grant the player with one wish. Connecting this to what Dan Smith mentioned in the opening, Badman intends to use this wish to bring back his daughter. Travis, meanwhile, seems to be solely concerned on completing the games just for the sake of beating them, coming to a truce with Badman that he can take the wish for himself. Not only is this humorous, but it actually fits his hardcore video game persona too. In my opinion, this premise is way more entertaining than the obvious route of them just being stuck inside of the console. I actually really like this aspect of just being thrown into the middle of something that's going on and then being given more context as the story progresses. It's almost like watching a Tarantino film, and it's not something I often see done in games. In fact, the other example I could think of off the top of my head is in Suda's own Killer 7, where you have no idea what's going on for the entire first mission, and then only afterwards are given a cutscene which explains more about the game's world and who the Killer 7 actually are. You could say this is dangerous, as it may put off players who are confused about what's going on and it may dissuade them from continuing, but that's Suda for you. So now we know that Travis and Badman are trying to beat all the Death Drive games. But since the Death Drive console itself was never released, the games are insanely rare and must be found before they can even be played. This is told in the adventure mode of the game called Travis Strikes Back. Here we follow Travis and his cat Jean as they travel all over in search of the 5 other legendary Death Ball games. This is done entirely in an old RPG/visual novel style. At first I wasn't really sure what was going on here, and I was wondering when the gameplay was going to start. But then when I realized that these segments were entirely focused on story, I really started to get into them. Each chapter finds Travis running into strange characters and situations, many of which are actually cool references and cameos to other Grasshopper games. Besides that, we also get scenarios of Travis traveling to Transylvania to hunt down Dracula and going to a maid cafe in Japan. Oh, and Jean can also talk now, which is strange at first, but it makes for some great banter between her, Travis, and the other weird people that they run into. While the bulk of the game's story is told in this adventure mode, there's also plenty of additional exposition told in the form of ominous letters faxed to Travis, and even old video game magazine-styled previews of the various Death Ball games. The faxes come from a Mr. K who co-developed the Death Drive with Dr. Juvenile. He first warns Travis that playing the Death Drive could cause his brain to degrade, before going on to admit that the device itself has a much more sinister purpose than just playing video games. I'd compare this extra material to the way that the classic Resident Evil games told their backstory. Thinking back to RE1 for instance, the main premise is very clear. Special forces under the name STARS are sent in to investigate a series of cannibalistic murders that have been happening in the Arklay Mountain region. After stumbling upon an abandoned mansion, the surviving members come across the undead, monstrous animals, and even more horrific experiments as they slowly uncover the mansion's dark secrets and try their best to survive. The reason this is clear is because it's all told through the gameplay and cutscenes as you progress. It's the game's unavoidable main story. Beyond this, however, there's also a lot of not so conspicuous plot found in the various notes, letters, and computer files found throughout the game. These delve deeper into the history of the mansion and the inhuman monsters that inhabit it. They're not necessary for understanding the game's main plot, but they provide a lot of extra content that expands upon the Resident Evil universe. I think that this is executed greatly, as it can be easily skipped without penalty for people who just want to get through the game, but it's also bonus content for those who are interested. Travis Strikes Again takes the same idea, but actually takes it even further. There's the general story itself that's told as Travis and Badman make their way through each game and defeat the bosses in each. This mostly focuses on their interactions with each boss character and Travis's afterthoughts. Then there's the faxes from K, which explain more about the true purpose of the Death Drive, as well as further diving into Dr. Juvenile's past. Finally, there's the Travis Strikes Back mode. While it may seem like this would link directly with the game's main story, it really doesn't. You're treated to this story mode in the form of chapters in between each game you play. Travis travels the world here. He partakes in deadly battles and builds a relationship with a recurring character who, for all intents and purposes, only exists in this mode alone. Sure, this mode could have just been a quick explanation of how Travis finds each Death Ball, but Suda51 decided to make it more than that, a full-fledged narrative in itself, and one that's actually more developed than what's told in the main game. Suda saw the chance to write more story, and he took it, even if it meant confusing or even alienating many casual players. And being that Suda's biggest strength is writing, this only makes sense. I'm not going to dance around the obvious question here. Is Travis Strikes Again a game that you want to play? Well, it's not a perfect game. The levels can be sloppily paced, perhaps going on a little longer than necessary. They aren't always designed the best and can even feel repetitive at times, especially earlier on when you don't have as many abilities to use. The lack of cutscenes and character dialogue is especially a bummer, since that's usually where Suda's games tend to shine the most. Players that aren't a fan of reading may find the text-heavy nature of the game burdensome, especially during the Travis Strikes Back scenarios, and while co-op mode enhances the gameplay in some ways, it can also suffer badly from the inconsistent camera, depending on which level you're playing on. That being said, the gameplay is not overly simple like so many people seem to assume. The various enemies, jumping attacks, super move, and many skill chips offer numerous ways to play. and I think it actually gives the gameplay in TSA more depth than either of the previous No More Heroes games, which were never really that strong in the gameplay department to begin with. Maybe you can get by with just spamming the light attack through some of Sweep mode, but for later levels and harder difficulties, you're gonna have to utilize all your moves if you want to succeed. It should also be mentioned that there's a level up system that's vital if you plan on beating the game, with each level granting you more health and attack power. While the cutscenes are few and far between, the ones we do get are really great, and do a good job of setting up the world and protagonists of each game that Travis enters, each with their own unique visual style and tone. From rotoscoping showing off an electronic superhero, to a full motion video akin to the Sega CD showcasing a serial killer, to genuine looking PS1 styled graphics, to even what looks like a modern day game. The variety here is unreal. Oh, and I have to talk about the game's music. I'm not even sure which ones to point out specifically. The songs are eclectic, but all great in their own way. So here's a sampler. Even the game select screen has this amazing trap style song that has shades of the No More Heroes theme inside of it, and I never knew I wanted it until now. In terms of collectibles, this game has quite a few. The money you earn throughout can be spent on t-shirts back at Travis's trailer, most of them being friendly shoutouts to other indie games that Suda happens to enjoy. There's ramen stalls found in each game which both serve to power you up and introduce a new ramen type that you can read about with the amusing food critiques in the ramen blog. The magazine reviews of the Deathball games contain cheats which tell you to input codes in specific areas of the game. These usually do something pretty basic like refill your health, but they also quietly trigger extra faxes from Kay as well. Each game also has a ridiculous joke cheat which is always fun to read. Imagine actually doing something like this to activate a cheat. Finally, there's a cat hunting side quest which involves going back into previously beaten levels to find Jean, who seems to be lost inside of them. If you manage to find where she's hidden in all the games, you even get a special skill chip as a reward. So if you were wondering if this game had replay value after beating it, I'd say that it does. And don't think that that's it either. There's plenty of neat little surprises and treats that you've come to unexpect in Suda games. One of the Deathball games that Travis enters is unfinished, and literally looks like a game in development in the Unreal Engine. Another mysterious game has no information on it like the other ones do, and ends up being something else entirely that I think fans of Grasshopper are really gonna like. I'd love to go into all these cool little moments, but they're best experienced firsthand and I really don't want to spoil them. This game doesn't quite feel like an indie game, yet it doesn't quite feel like a full budget title either, which makes sense. Suda51's been very transparent about the scale of Travis Strikes Again. It's a lower budget title made with a small development team. That being said, the base game is only $30, which is half the cost of most full price games. The physical copy is $40 and comes with the season pass of DLC. I have to admit that being more of an old school gamer, I've been very critical and even skeptical of the DLC era of games that we seem to be in right now. But games like Little Nightmares have made me realize that, when done right, DLC can be a cool extension to a game that you already enjoy, rather than just some cheap scheme to make a quick buck. I was gonna get the physical copy anyway, since I'm a physical copy kind of guy. But after completing the game, I was happy to realize that I'd be getting more of it in the near future. The first part of the DLC, which is out already, lets you play as returning fan favorite Shinobu. She doesn't play wildly different from Travis and Badman, but she does get 2 unique skill chips that show off her signature swordplay. And it's just cool to play as her. Also included is a full-length story mode for Badman, which delves into his life and backstory leading up to Travis Strikes Again. If you enjoyed Travis's story mode as much as I did, then you'll really like this. Maybe even more so. The second part, which comes out in April, will include Bad Girl as a playable character, and will add a full new Death Ball level and boss as well. Remember that Death Ball game I mentioned earlier that was still in development? Well, that wasn't just a quick joke. It was literally still in development, and it's the game that's gonna come out for the DLC. Suda51, you madman, you are a goddamn genius. At this point, I've basically said all I have to say without diving too far into spoiler territory. For me, this game was easily worth the $40, and I'm really excited for the DLC that's dropping next month. Problems aside, this is the first Grasshopper game that's gotten me this excited since, well, probably since the last time Suda51 both wrote and directed a Grasshopper game. Yeah, Suda has full reins again for the first time in over a decade. And even on a smaller budget, it really shows. This isn't some cheaply thrown together cash in trying to make an easy buck. It's clearly a passion project with a lot of thought put into it, even with its flaws. Call it a spin-off or a side title or whatever you want. It's not No More Heroes 3. But instead, a celebration of Grasshopper's 20-year catalog. And most importantly, for the first time in over 10 years, I can confidently say that this is a Suda51 game. If you're a big Suda51 fan, as I am, then I really think this is a can't-miss title. But if you're more of a casual fan or maybe new to the Sudaverse altogether, is this worth your $30? That's really up for you to decide. I just wanted to tell people why I love it so much and why I really think it's worth giving a chance. Well, that's it for my review today. Next time I'm going to do something older again. Probably. But I hope you enjoyed a newer game for once. It was kind of a big experiment, so hopefully it wasn't as big of a mess as it feels like it was for me. Anyways, that's it, and I will be back.